Well, you know, there's a psychobiologist named Jaak Panksepp, who's one of the world's great biological psychologists, and he studied rough and tumble play in animals. So rats, for example, a huge part of the socialization process that's key to the development of the prefrontal cortex in juvenile male rats in particular emerges and matures as a consequence of rough and tumble play. And one of the amazing things that Panksepp discovered, and this truly is an amazing thing, is that if you pair two rats together and then let them play repeated bouts, the big rat will dominate the little rat to begin with in the first bout. But if the big rat doesn't let the little rat win about 30% of the time in repeated play bouts, then the little rat won't play anymore. So you get an emergent morality, an emergent play-centered morality, even among rats as a consequence of rough and tumble play. And that rough and tumble, I did a fair bit of research on rough and tumble play about, it's probably 20 years ago now, 15 years ago anyways. And it's really quite clear that rough and tumble play helps children parameterize their bodies so that they know how they extend and also what limits there is in the use of physical interactions with another person, what's fun, what's provocative, what's pushing it too far, what's painful. And of course, kids love rough and tumble play as well. They're just absolutely starving for it. And we've squeezed it out of the kindergartens, the nursery schools, the elementary schools, the junior high schools, all of that, and forbid. And what Panksepp also found was that if you deprived juvenile rats of the opportunity to engage in active rough and tumble play, that they showed symptoms that were broadly analogous to those of attention deficit disorder in human boys, and that you could also treat that with Ritalin the same way in rats as you could with boys. Yes. So there's that rough and tumble play issue. You know, and you might think too, one question is, why might a mother be distrustful of the rough and tumble play episode? And some of that might be sensitivity with regards to the kids, but a huge part of that also is trust on her trust with regards to the father, you know, because it's rambunctious and noisy. And if she trusts, let's say, that active masculinity that plays rough, then she'll stay away and let the fun happen. But if there's distrust running through the family, then she'll stand between the kids and the father, and then he won't get to involve himself in that way. And then he'll turn off. And I've seen that happen in many, many families. Okay, so there's rough and tumble play. That's a big one. What else do you see?
Let me take the evolution of how rough and tumble play goes and all the dimensions of where the slippery slope that it leads to. So what neither the mom nor the dad know is that this rough and tumble play leads to the types of things that you just mentioned, which are also evident in elephants and so on. Yeah. But it also leads to the distinction between a child being able to distinguish between being assertive versus aggressive. So the kid starts, for example, maybe kicking the dad in the wrong place, or poking the dad in the eyes, or pulling the dad's hair, and the dad says, "Sweetie, you can fake eye contact to the left and then move to the right to win in this wrestling match, or you can you can do this, this, and this, but you can't do these things." Yeah. And if you do these things, we'll stop the roughhousing.
Yeah. So there's a really important issue there. So two things there. So imagine that a rough and tumble bout is like a dance. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the point of the dance is so that both people are having a good time while it's happening. Yes. Because otherwise it's not play, right? And as soon as either party is no longer having a good time, you've actually snapped out of the psychobiological function of the play circuit. Yeah. So basically what you're telling the child by putting those rules on is, we can interact physically within a very limited set of parameters. And what you have to learn to do is to be a sophisticated player within that set of parameters. And you want to learn how to push the boundaries, right? Because the most fun rough and tumble play is right on the edge between assertiveness and aggression. Right. So, and you can see kids, like I used to work in daycare centers when I was a kid, when I was 18, 19, and the kids would line up to rough and tumble play with me because that was still allowable then, and they were so desperate for it, it was just ridiculous. And I could really tell the difference between the kids who had engaged in that sort of play and the ones that hadn't. And the ones that hadn't were painfully awkward. And they would hurt themselves and you when you wrestled with them. They'd put their thumb in your eye, and they would cry often too when they got surprised but not hurt. because they couldn't tell the difference between just being startled and being hurt. And so they were fragile, and that also made them not fun to play with. And the thing that's so interesting about that, too, is that Piaget talked about this when he talked about the development of children, is that, the more sophisticated pretend play and then sophisticated cognitive play that emerges, say, between 5 and 7, and then with the cognitive play older than that, is that unless you have that underlying psychomotor embodied dance down, you don't get to really proceed in a sophisticated way to those higher levels of play, because other people don't want to play with you. So the rough and tumble play, the importance of that can hardly be overstated. So
absolutely, and the framework here is that when you've set up a system where you've said that men are part of the patriarchy, their desire is to dominate women and make rules to benefit men at the expense of them, benefit men at the expense of women, you have a framework, an emotional setting, which is not conducive to men saying, here's my value, or women saying, let me see what the checks and balances of parenting is that leads to the best of you coming out and the best of me coming out. All of that has we've skipped over an inherent sense of father knows best to father knows less, and so the process that I'll be sharing in a moment of what roughhousing leads to and the slippery slope that happens when it doesn't happen is what has not even been nurtured as a possibility to be articulated in this culture at this time.
I also think too, that if you have a partner who hasn't been played with, then that partner can't tell the difference between boisterous rambunctiousness and aggression. And if there's a hypothesis about domination and the patriarchy running its course underneath that, then there's going to be conceptual confusion about the physical interactions that have the appearance of submission and dominance, because that's part of the roughhousing play routine. That is going to be viewed through a lens of tyrannical interaction rather than just good fun. And I mean, you can tell the difference, because if the kids are rough and tumble playing, they're unbelievably enthusiastic about it and engaged and laughing and giggling, and they'll play right to the point of exhaustion because they need it. They need it so much. But that's a hard thing to observe from the outside if you're not accustomed to that.
And if you don't have that framework of men having and dads having a value to begin with, absolutely not. So here's maybe what might be helpful for a mom to understand. That the rough and tumble play, we now know helps children distinguish between being assertive and aggressive, but a number of other things also happen during that play, which is a bond that is created between the father and the child. And in almost in doing expert witness work to help children have both parents after divorce, I've observed more than 50 families, and usually the father interacting with the children. And in almost every case actually, I believe, that I have seen, there's this bond is used by the father to say things like, okay, we're no more roughhousing now. Tell you what, you get your homework done, you get your chores done, you get all ready for bed, brush teeth brush well, and the bedtime is 9 o'clock. Whenever you get all that done, we'll have between the time you get it done and the time of 9 o'clock in order for you to have some more fun, either with roughhousing or reading your favorite story, or whatever you prefer. It's your choice.
Well, with Panksepp's work too, he found that the rats will work to enter a play arena. Yes. Because play, you think play is so Panksepp established very, very clearly that there is a primary play circuit in mammals. It's a separate psychobiological circuit. It's not exploration. It's a whole different motivational drive. But activity in that circuit is intrinsically pleasurable. And part of that appears to be because it's so key to proper socialization that it's regarded by children and by social mammals as intrinsically valuable. And so it makes perfect sense that can be used as a source of primary reward. And I think your comments about the man and the kids binding themselves together through play is also really important, because one of the things that I do with young men who, I think young men tend to be somewhat alienated from infants who are under about 9 months old, because they're not really equipped to know what the hell to do with them. I mean, they can learn and they can be good at it, but it's not their domain of natural expertise. But once a kid hits about 9 months, and starts to be able to imitate and to pound and to play and to respond to gentle teasing, like that's a perfect time for the father to swoop in, which is very helpful for a mother, by the way, who wants to have another child, and to start really cementing a relationship that's based on that interesting combination of high energy fun plus the disciplined interactions that are necessary as a precursor to that. And if you interfere with that, then you stop the father from being able to form that, from liking his kids, really, because that's how the liking comes about, is through play. And so it's crucial. It's of crucial significance.
Absolutely, and thank you. The additional framework that you're placing on this is really deepening my own understanding of it as well.
Yeah, well, there's a book called Affective Neuroscience written by Jaak Panksepp. It's on my reading list on my website, and I would highly recommend that because he lays out the findings from the animal literature on the primary play circuit. It's really, he should have won a Nobel Prize for it. I mean, discovering an entirely new motivational system in the brain is a major, major contribution. And to also, the other thing that he did that was so cool, and it sort of reminded me of Jean Piaget's work a little bit, is he made a very strong case that out of play emerges an ethic. And, that's why I was so interested when you mentioned that interactions with father actually increase empathy. Because, if someone has empathy for you, that means that, that can lead to a certain kind of narcissism, right? Because you're always the center of attention. You're not empathic unless you learn that you're not any more important than the next person, particularly the person that you happen to be playing with. So, okay, so let's continue with what fathers are doing.
In that roughhousing,
yeah.
One of the things you've been talking about.
Yeah.
So in that roughhousing, what happens is that the bond that is created by the dad allows the dad to say, you've got, we'll continue the roughhousing if you get, between 8:30 and 9, if you have everything done. But so the child learns to postpone gratification from doing what it loves to do right then and there, that is be roughhoused with and deal with what it has to deal with before it gets more of what it needs. And so, but the bond.
So that's interesting. So you actually think, and I wonder if there's been any. See, we don't know much about the origin of the trait conscientiousness, which is at least in part the ability to delay gratification. And it is, after intelligence, it's the best predictor of long-term life success, especially in managerial and administrative jobs, in algorithmic jobs. It's not associated with creativity, but that's a side issue. So your hypothesis is that the primary way men are socializing that is by using work to play as a bridge.
Yes, that play creates a bond. So a lot of the problem is when moms often say, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this, you have to do that. The mother is often experienced by the child as sort of the disciplinarian who's always making him or her do things. And there's a seeds of rebellion start to occur of sort of like, how much am I going to be myself? How much am I going to do what mom does? Do I want to be a mama's boy? Or it doesn't even happen consciously, but you just sort of feel like you're being pushed down by all the rules. But with dad, the bond that is, or moms who roughhouse with the children, a bond is created. And from that, and you want to return to that connection. So it's like a child going on a roller coaster where there's an enormous amount of safety, but you also excitement, but also an enormous amount of safety. And so you trust the dad to combine that both, and you want to return to that. So you're willing to focus on getting done what you need to do, your homework, your chores, your brush your teeth or whatever, in order to get what you want to do, which is of postponed gratification. But now let's take the slippery slope when this doesn't happen. So
let me just add one more thing to that. Well, the thing that's so cool about that is that you've also provided a really intelligent piece of parenting advice for fathers. It's like, because so let's say B.F. Skinner, who was the famous animal behaviorist, demonstrated quite clearly that you could train animals with reward more effectively than with threat or punishment. Now, threat or punishment is necessary. Obviously, we wouldn't have biological systems subserving those emotions if they weren't necessary. But reward is harder to use because you have to be much more attentive and intervene when something good happens. And so you really have to be watching. But your hypothesis here is, look, fathers, spend a bunch of time playing with your kids and having as much fun as you can with them, because by formulating that bond, you can use that as the source of reward that will be appreciated by the child with regards to disciplinary strategies. So it's a twofold victory. One is it's fun and you get to like your kids and have a good time with them. But the second is you have a very positive means of disciplining them in the best sense, encouraging them and disciplining them. So that's a really useful thing to know practically.
So deepening the trust of the kids, like you're playing and you're right on the edge that you were talking about, but there's dad to make sure that the fun doesn't get too hard for you, for him, for your sister, and so on. And so that's all happening at the same time. Now,
right, and that's embodied. You can see that two ways. That's embodied trust. So if you toss a little kid up in the air and catch them, I mean, it's very exciting to them, both being tossed up because of the threat, but then the relief that occurs because of the safety that's put in there. So it's not abstract, it's really demonstrated. And then
absolutely, our dad tossing that child up and then in fact missing the child, quote unquote, and the child lands on the bed. And it gets enormous, like, oh, I was missed, so you were going to catch me, but also recognize.
Yes, well, that shows that things can happen that aren't entirely what you predict, but within the confines of a trusting relationship, that's still okay. And then you could also imagine if the dad is wrestling with more than one kid at the same time, then he's also acting as just referee, right? So, and then the kids learn how to be judicious in the distribution of attention. They learn how to play fair. They learn how everybody can have a turn and everybody wins at the same time. And so,
and that bonding is what is part of what creates, and just everything you just said is part of what leads the child to have empathy training. And the empathy training came from, no, you were too rough on your sister there. If you try it again, you can't be that rough. Oh, you still continue to be that rough? Okay, let's.
No more play. That's right. Play stops when everyone isn't having fun. When my kids were little, we had this couch that was a sectional in 6 pieces. And so we could put the couches facing each other, and then we put up the backs all the way around it. So it was like a little wrestling ring. And so then I would take the kids in there and just wrestle them half to death, But one of the things I used to do was if one of the kids was rough with the other and made them cry, then I noticed that the kid who made the other kid cry wouldn't look at the crying kid. They'd look away and avoid. And so I always used to say, no, you look and you see what happened, because that triggers that embodied empathy. And then you can easily have a conversation and say, look, is that how you want the game to go? Or do you want everybody to have fun? And the thing is, once the kid actually looks, then they've got it, right? Because they can't escape from that empathic identification. And so, yeah.
When the child doesn't have that, so we have all this data now, these 70 different areas where children do so much worse when they don't have a father involvement. So let's look at the next stage of that. When that father does not do this roughhousing, and as just one example of many, and is not enforcing boundaries, the child then doesn't learn to have that postponed gratification. So we have hard data on this. That children raised predominantly by dads are only 15% likely to have ADHD. Children raised predominantly by moms are 30% likely to have ADHD. So if we looked at what we just talked about, the children that are raised by the dads are learning that they have to postpone that gratification in order to get the reward that they want. Now you take that capacity to postpone gratification to school. The child without postponed gratification assigned a homework assignment doesn't really is oftentimes distracted by a text that's come in, distracted by the opportunity to play video games, distracted by wanting to exchange notes with other kids, is distracted.
Sure. The distraction thing about there's no need to explain ADHD. What there is a need to do is to explain why every kid doesn't have it. And the answer that you just laid out, is that some kids learn how to control their distractibility doesn't require an explanation, because people are distracted by what's immediately rewarding. And that doesn't require, it's like addiction. Actually, addiction doesn't require explanation either. What requires explanation is the development of the resources that allow you to withstand addictive pressures in the face of the fact that they're everywhere and they're powerful. So it's development of control that's really the curious issue. And I've never heard anyone make this connection between the use of play as a reward and that delay of gratification. That's a very, very interesting idea. That's very interesting.
And then let me take it another step further, if I may. So when this delayed gratification is happening or does not happen, and then the boy isn't able to finish homework, he starts beginning to feel ashamed of himself. Or if he's maybe athletic and his parents believe that it's really going to be helpful to the child to have beautiful dreams. Sweetie, you want to be an NBA player and you're tall and you continue practicing, you can be an NBA player and you can have your dreams. But he doesn't have that postponed gratification, so cannot do the boring repetition that comes with all success, including being an Olympic star or an NBA player or anything else.
Or playing the piano or learning to read or...
Great example, certainly the violin. And so anything that is his dream, the bigger the dream, the bigger the disappointment. And it's not just disappointment that he fears will happen to his parents, but also the sense that he says he's going to do one thing in school, his teachers, his peers are not respecting him as much. Yeah. The cheerleaders aren't going 1st and 10, get a concussion again to him. They're doing it to somebody else. 1st and 10, do it again. And so the boy is beginning to feel shame.
Yeah, well, you think shame. Look, here's the precondition for shame. So let's say that you are attracted by a goal naturally, and maybe that's scaffolded by your parents, maybe it's scaffolded by your peers, but it's something that you're naturally turning your attention towards. It grips you in some sense. Okay, and we'll assume that it's a difficult goal. And so then there's an ethic that emerges out of that, which is that if that goal is valuable and it's difficult, then there's sacrifices that have to be made, delays of gratification that have to be implemented in order for you to be worthy to attain that goal. Okay, that's all part of the game if you think about it as a game. Well, then if you observe yourself unable to play the rules of the game, play by the rules, then how can you not suffer shame and self-contempt? Because you've already adopted an ethical framework, which is this is worth attaining. And if you observe in yourself then the inability to attain it because you're constantly being distracted, then you're going to have contempt for yourself. Absolutely. And then the way out of that, this is something I learned from Nietzsche. Here's the terrible thing about that, because that's a great pathway to nihilism. Because let's say you posit 4 goals in succession that you find valuable, and then you observe yourself unable to discipline yourself to attain the goals. Well, after 4 successive failures, it's like Homer Simpson said to Bart. He said to Bart, you tried and you failed, and then you tried and you failed again. What did you learn? And Homer says to Bart, the conclusion is never try. Yeah. Right. And so if you fail a few times at attaining something of importance because you see that you have no discipline, then a logical response to that is to cease positing goals.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what happens. But we have, through technology, sort of a perfect escape. And that escape is into video games where you can identify with a hero and you can lose the game as often as you wish to with nobody noticing. And then as you begin to get better with certain manipulations, you can play that game with certain types of people and increase your skill set at the game. But you're never able to translate that into everyday life and so you start becoming addicted to that game, which are designed to increase your dopamine without having to actually achieve anything.
Well, the thing about the games that's different, like the video games, what's different, so a game for a little kid has to be immediately rewarding. That's why rough and tumble play works, for example. It has to be immediately rewarding. And then the game shades into real life. But as the game shades into real life, what happens is the rewards are deferred. And you get more and more disciplined at not being immediately rewarded, like when you're learning to read or play the piano, for the long-term goal. The thing about video games is that they do require the development of skill. But the immediate reward is built in along with the delayed reward, because otherwise the game wouldn't be fun for someone who's learning. And so the problem is that a lot of real life games aren't necessarily fun while you're learning them, because you have to attain a certain level of mastery, and that requires discipline. That's also what's wrong with the idea that children can just learn in keeping with what they're spontaneously interested in. It's like there's some truth in that, because why not follow a child's interests? But the problem is that many highly skilled endeavors, virtually any endeavor that's going to be of economic or productive utility, requires a apprenticeship where there's a lot of grinding. There's a lot of just disciplinary or disciplined repetition. And so, okay, well, absolutely. All right. So,
and then one more dimension of that is that as the boy gets to boy-girl age, if he begins to sense that he's heterosexual, he notices that the girls are far more interested in going out with the quarterbacks or the student body presidents or the performer type boys that are sort of honored in the school system and in life in general. And so he begins to start withdrawing and fearing that he can't attract those girls, especially the ones he's most biologically addicted to, beautiful ones, the cheerleader types. He starts withdrawing into porn. And a little bit of porn is not a huge issue, but the porn basically is based on the dopamine increasing with each new stimulus that you have. And so as he gets addicted to that dopamine, he begins to get addicted to only being able to be stimulated when the risk-taking is higher and higher. Yes. So finally he succeeds in one woman being able to come over to his house and be sexual with her, but he's so unable to be turned on just by the mere maybe light touch of a hand, or turned on by just being fascinated by what she's saying in the interaction, or some combination of the drama of being with her combined with a little bit of touch. He's so used to a huge amount of stimulus that occurs, and when he gets to be trusting of her a little bit, he says, can you be this way? Can you do this? Can you act this way? And she feels like just some piece of object that is being traded in for the porn. Eventually gets disgusted with him, withdraws, and he begins to say, all right, this convinces me I am as worthless as I thought I was. And the only thing that will give me satisfaction is back to the porn. And what became a little bit of an addiction becomes more of an addiction, even as he's also becoming simultaneously frequently addicted to the video games at the same time. And so all of this is that slippery slope from the roughhousing that the father is not able to articulate to the mother about the value of that, combined with the trust that you were integrating with that, combined with the lack of the bond, combined with the postponed gratification being taught. And then when the postponed gratification is not taught, the slippery slope down the hill to shame, self-disgust, and fear that if he tries anything, he's just going to prove to himself and everybody around him that he's one more failure. And the degree to which he articulates the desire to try something is the announcement publicly to a group of people that he's pretty much going to say, today I'm going to try this, and tomorrow it's going to be a failure, until he becomes enormously shamed. In worst case scenarios, this can lead to such depression that it creates a desire to commit suicide. And in the very worst case scenarios, it's a belief, I believe, we see in the school shooters.
Yeah, well, that brews resentment. Absolutely, man. That brews resentment and anger like nothing else.
And who will they get resentment and anger about? Who are the people that have rejected him? It's the classmates, it's the teachers. Nobody appreciates that sweet sensitivity inside of him, and sees him. Well, I am so angry at that, and one day I have a desperate need to get their attention and say, I count, I matter, pay attention to me. And in worst case scenarios, only a very small percentage, but in worst case scenarios, you can understand the school shooting emerging from that.
Yeah, well, for every kid who goes and shoots up a school, there's 1,000 who are fantasizing in a direction that's headed that way. Exactly. And some of that's at the beginning of that, it's something like, well, I'm very angry at people because they don't see the value in me, but if they get to the point where they're doing something like fantasizing extreme violence, they're so far past that even, they think they've developed a real hatred for everything and a wish to see it obliterated. And that's obviously that's the most terrible of the terrible outcomes that might be generated.